Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
Hi guys and ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Through a Scottish Prism. Nice to have you back. Been a week since we had a wee chat. And it comes round so quick, and here we are again. I'm joined with some one newbie this week, but I'm delighted to say I've got my usual crew, and I've got there in Clackmannanshire, we have our Eva Comrie. Eva, welcome, my friend.
Hi, Roddy. It's been some week at home and internationally, and some terribly sad events have taken place that I know we'll speak about, but it's been quite an emotional week for various reasons.
It is indeed. It is indeed. And from down there on the borders, we have got Dr. Yvonne Ridley.
Hi,
Yvonne,
Roddy.
my friend, how are you?
Yes, fine. It's been a roller coaster week, as Eva said, but in some ways it's also been like Groundhog Day, in as much as we're back to cervixes and penises again.
Well, indeed. No doubt we'll be talking about your local butcher as well.
All life is down here.
Well, here we are, and of course, now I'm not sure if it's North Dakota or Dallas, but we've got the Coatbridge Cavalier. Where are we? Dakota or Dallas?
Yeah, it's North Dakota. I was just doing a business trip to Dallas, so it was. It's the frozen north again, but you won't see much in the way of this cervixes, penises, and butchers. It's just made me laugh. It's like
it
sounds like a good soap opera, doesn't
it? Out, guys, and you can tell the difference if you're a man or a woman. Then you know.
Well, unfortunately, it isn't. But we've got there. So we've got me in Dubai. We've got our two friends here in Scotland. We've got you in North Dakota, and now we're joined by Daniel Jack, a newbie to the show, who is in Finland. Daniel, welcome to a Scottish Prism. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Roddy. I'm in august company. I don't know what contribution I'll be able to make.
Well, you know, you sent me a big enough check to get you on the show. So here you are.
Good.
No, Daniel, you're selling yourself short. You, of course, were a senior diplomat. In fact, probably the last, or probably maybe even the only Scotsman that's been in the United Nations on official business. I hope you're not blushing.
I am blushing. I was one of the few who was allowed to represent Scotland in front of the United Nations. It was the United Nations Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities in Geneva. And I was only allowed to do that because we had a good story to tell in relation to Scotland, whereas the rest of the UK didn't. And that was reflected in the committee's report, which is quite damning for the UK government. So it was a win for us.
It's good to have an expert on here to join us and bring a bit of expertise to us. But I'll kick off right away. And Eva, we'd said last week that we'd hoped we were finished with all the gender issues and we could get back to talking about independence, because that's what we want to talk about. We don't want to talk about these other things. Unfortunately, we're a review programme. And as a review programme, you've got to review what's been happening.
Yep.
It's all been happening. And the first thing, of course, was the Scottish Prison Service come out and said they had changed their policy on admissions for prisoners, and that they were now going to revert back to, if I've got it right, to the birth sex of the prisoners, as opposed to this new gender ID. Quite a turnaround.
A complete volte-face, and in essence doing what I think the Cabinet Secretary for Justice had indicated at an earlier stage they wouldn't do, because of course he, as well as the First Minister, have persisted in this mantra that trans women are women, and then slightly altered that to bring in a new gender of rapist or individual. And I'm reminded of the Dennis Healy principle, which I really think that both Keith Brown and Nicola Sturgeon need to take into account. They've been digging for weeks on end now, and it's really got to stop. It reached its pinnacle, I suppose, during the week with Jim Spence and the infamous Tadger comment. only in Scotland. But the man was right. And what he had to say resonated with the audience, the live audience, as well as throughout not just Scotland, but the whole of the UK and much further afield. We've been embarrassed beyond belief by the behaviour of the senior politicians. So I'd like to think that some common sense is beginning to prevail, but it's only come about as the result of very extreme pressure from the general public, and particularly all the women's organisations and some of the men that were able to support them. It wouldn't have happened otherwise. We'd have still been sitting in that ridiculous set of circumstances where we would have still had intact male bodies in Cornton Vale. I would imagine there might still be some there now. What's interesting, though, is that the Learned Lessons Review conducted into the Scottish Prison Service was conducted by the Scottish Prison Service, and that just does not seem right to me. You should not be marking your own homework. So I asked a few people in the know about this, and one is a chap who was a civil servant for a very long time. In his view, people could have conducted it, but it was suggested that perhaps the Chief Inspector of Prisons should have conducted the review. It might then have had greater confidence in the public than it seems to have. But there are still answers needed for some questions. The main one from my point of view is this. The warrant from the court said the double rapist, Adam Graham, was to go to Barlinnie. The review from SPS says SPS altered that to Cornton Vale. I want to know who altered it, why they altered it, and when they altered it, because it's abundantly clear that sending this rapist man to Barlinnie in the first instance was absolutely right. The mistake was sending him to Cornton Vale at all, but especially in circumstances where he had not been subject to a risk assessment. So we're told he was segregated in Cornton Vale. That's really not the point. He could have been segregated in Barlinnie if that was needed for his welfare. We're also told in the SPS review that no women, no female prisoners were at risk of harm whilst Adam Graham was in Cornton Vale. But you see, that's really not the point. There are female prisoners who would have been in Cornton Vale who may well have been traumatised knowing that there was a double rapist on the premises. And for those reasons, as well as for many others, I think that this Learned Lessons Review actually has to be redone. So not only does the whole report have to be disclosed and the public could then see exactly what's been going on, but we can then take an informed view as to how robust the review has been and then decide whether we want somebody else to have a closer look at what's been going on there. Because where we are just now is not only embarrassing, it's reducing confidence and faith and trust in the whole process, and it's got to be fixed.
For sure. But Yvonne, it wasn't only the Scottish Prison Service that had us having a rethink. Your old industry in the newspapers, the IPSO, who are the people who oversee the correct procedures are carried out in the newspapers, they too now are suddenly decided to review how they report on gender crimes, on gender issues, because a lot of us have noticed this. The woman charged with rape, and you go, how can that be? And, she used her penis several times. How can it be she? So they're now starting to. Is the pushback coming, Yvonne?
I think so. And by coincidence, I spent some time filling out a report for Ipsos. I'm one of the co-founders of Women in Journalism in the UK, and I'm particularly interested in this issue. And I just think, why is no one thinking of the victims in all of this? And, Eva, as usual, bang on the money. She said that a lot of women would be traumatized by this. Well, let's just remember, before this double rapist was convicted and locked up, he actually went on a beautician's course and used an assumed name and inveigled himself on this course, where one session involved a tanning booth, and a lot of the trainee beauticians stripped off in front of this double rapist and as part of their coursework. Those girls, when they found out afterwards that this double rapist had been perving over them, they were traumatized. You know, it's about time we started thinking about the victims in all of this. And this is something that seems to bypass Nicola Sturgeon. And this is why I get so angry with this fraudulent First Minister who says that she's a feminist to her fingertips, when clearly she's not. She couldn't give a stuff about victims, about the women. And I watched her wriggling like a worm on a hook when the equally odious Tory leader asked her, was this double rapist a man or a woman? Simple enough question. He had to ask her 2 or 3 times. And of course, we still didn't get an answer. Nicola, the double rapist, has a penis pet. He's a man. And can we just get over this whole subject and move on to what all of Prism listeners want to hear about, and that's independence. Where are we with independence? There's my hand.
We're going to come on. We're going to come on to that. But Yvonne's right there, Phil. I mean, when Douglas Ross turned around and said, I mean, one thing, Nicola Sturgeon was so sure-footed, such a good, always in command of the Parliament. And on this, she's looking terribly, terribly weak. But when he turned around and said, I'll give you a clue, he's got a penis, and she still wouldn't give it a straight answer. Is she putting unnecessary stress upon herself and putting herself into situations that she could avoid by just, I was going to say man up, but I don't know what the right phrase to use, to face it head on?
Yeah, she should be doing her job. And this is what it comes down to. She's not doing her job. She's not doing the job that she was elected to do, that we wanted from the SNP. It's why we voted for SNP. Nothing about self-ID in any manifesto, as the point has been many times. But to be honest, this shouldn't even be in the news. This is what the behaviour of the UK government, sadly, and it pains me to say this, but this is what normal behaviour looks like by a government body responsible for the safeguarding of vulnerable people in our society. In this case, imprisoned females. Even Yvonne are bang on the money yet again. A watchdog should not be the body needing watching, you know. And Yvonne's point about care about the victims and targets first. The inquiry required on this is clear. We need an inquiry on exactly what went on with this switch of transfer for Adam Graham. And the inquiry must not be by the Scottish Government. It has to be independent. It has to be objective. And more on independence later, I'm sure that should be the key word. That's what we all want to be talking about. But Nicola, final point in this is Nicola and the assorted, spineless, malleable, sheeple that still blindly follow her, even after all of this madness has been exposed. They're doing that because they're in jobs with paying conditions they could only dream about, and they need to be removed. No excuses. I was only following the party line and doing what was told doesn't cut it. If you were part of this, you betrayed Scotland and your tea's out.
Daniel, we've expressed that we're pleased that the Scottish Prison Service and the IPSO are reviewing how they've been doing things previously. But 2 things that have concerned me was one that Keith Brown said that they wouldn't amend the bill at all. And Nicola Sturgeon's insistent that she's going to fight the Section 35 and try and get her bill through without any amendments. So are they just playing for time, trying to appease the crowd with this? And is it wise for her now, after all that's going on, to go and try and take this to the courts to overturn Westminster supremacy, which will ultimately end up in the Supreme Court in London? And it's highly unlikely that they're going to go against Westminster, are they?
Well, that's true, yes. I mean, the interesting thing for me, Roddy, you said there about pleasing the crowd. Who is the crowd in all of this? The whole of the government has been held captive by what is proved to be a flawed ideology and policy direction. And I understand completely why politicians of all denominations don't want to accept that they make mistakes, but they do. They are human like the rest of us. And to go and, pursue this to the umpteenth degree, knowing full well, as you're saying, that they will fail in all of this, what is behind it? And I think the interesting question for me is, who is driving this agenda? Phil spoke about these people who are following religiously like sheep, agreeing everything that's being said. There's a very powerful force underpinning this whole policy agenda, but it's not clear to us who actually is in the driving seat. And I think that's quite worrying. It's worrying when you have a government who's been in power for so long, who seemingly have been held captive by an interest group like this. It has repercussions, wider repercussions for the whole democratic structure. And I think everybody should be concerned about that and the ultimate end of that.
And do you think, Daniel, that ultimately she has damaged the independence cause with this?
Oh, I think so. I think there is now a disconnect between the notion of independence and how Scotland will thrive and flourish under independence, and how Scotland has deteriorated. There is no other word for it. Deteriorated in recent years under the SNP government. When Alex won the election, the majority in the Scottish Parliament, and led a government up until the first referendum, the people in the streets saw that government was competent. That government delivered on its promises. It's been failure after failure since his departure. And the people aren't stupid. The people see that, education standards are falling, transport's in a mess. All these things resonate with the public, the man and woman in the street. And I think this whole gender thing is the final nail in the coffin for that.
Yeah, that's a heck of a hill to die on.
Absolutely.
Eva, we mustn't just solely blame, although the SNP and Nicola Sturgeon, the Greens were in this as well. And many of us were complaining about certain individuals who were being vicious, abusive, threatening. And we know that, one of them was sitting in the gallery. He calls himself Beth Pickleby, who's now been suspended by the Greens for his Twitter replies and messages, vicious, violent, and aggressive. This is the same guy, isn't it? That Beth, I did it for you, said Alec Cole-Hamilton, and the MSPs turned around and clapped him up in the gallery. They're kind of looking foolish now, are they not?
This is really very interesting, unfortunately, because the tweets and the posts that seem to be those which have been complained about, which have led to this person's suspension, are tweets which predate the debate in the Scottish Parliament at which he was present and where he had selfies taken with various politicians, including Maggie Chapman. He was applauded, as were his associates, by pretty well all the MSPs in the room, certainly all those who voted in favour of the bill. They were all standing up applauding him. Those people must have known or should have known the type of posts that he was making. He had several where he was brandishing weapons. There was a knife. There was what looks like a baseball bat. There were comments made where he was referring to gender critical women as being TERFs. That's considered to be hate speech. All of these posts were done long before his presence within our Parliament. And yet in that Parliament, the people who were excluded at one stage were women wearing suffragette tartan scarves, not people like this person who had obviously behaved very badly for quite a long period before this. And when you were asking earlier, who do you think's behind this or who's driving this? It was very interesting to note that Alex Cole-Hamilton, as the Scottish leader of the Liberal Democrats, was vociferous in his praise for this this person to whom he refers as Beth in the video that he's been trying to get taken down, because he says repeatedly, "We did it for you, Beth, we did it for you. In the dark days, we would look up and we would see you there on the balcony, and we did it for you." So Alex Cole-Hamilton has questions to answer. He certainly owes an apology, as do several of his colleagues, to the women of Scotland who have been traduced by this fellow and others like him. But what I think is very interesting, and it's an emerging, developing, changing picture, is that it's reported that one of Alex Cole-Hamilton's constituents emailed him and actually did get an apology and some sort of retraction on a private basis in an email. I haven't seen the email, I've only read about it. But if he has given an apology and a retraction privately, he really should be man enough now to accept the error of his ways and to make a public apology.
But is he a man? That's the question, and these days one wants to ask. Yvonne, Alex Salmond made an intervention this week, and I thought, and I do declare an interest, but I thought he was very brave. But he did, as I alluded to, he was interviewed and answered the question right away. What is a female, adult human female? That is a woman. And he went on and he made a phrase which I think is a great rallying call. My question to you is, was he wise to get himself involved in this? Should he have stayed out of it? But he did say, we need self-determination, not self-identification, which I think was absolutely a piece of brilliance. But again, I have an interest, so I would say that. What do you think?
Well, it's like having a fly in a studio, isn't it? You can chase it around with a newspaper and keep swatting, and it's forever there. And Alex just went, enough. Said in 10 seconds, what is a woman? Gave his verdict, and that's it, done and dusted. Nobody will ask him again. He is the consummate politician. He just gave a masterclass in how to deal with a question which has bizarrely become the question of the year for every political journalist who gets sat in front of the First Minister of the leader of the SNP. The very first question they all want to ask is, First Minister, what is a woman? Not, First Minister, can you tell us what you've got planned for independence? That should be the first question. Mind you, she couldn't answer that one either. In fact, there's very little that Nicola can answer these days. She can't tell us when she knew that her husband had written out a check for 107 grand for the SNP. So, and apparently she's supposed to be negotiating a deal for her political biography. Well, if she can't remember something as simple as 107 grand leaving a husband's bank account, this isn't going to be a biography worth reading, because I doubt she'll be able to remember much about her time as First Minister.
I tell you, I'm going tomorrow to Thailand for a wee holiday, and I was up doing some last minute shopping and used the old credit card. The time I got home, I was getting questioned because there was a ping in the wife's phone to tell her I'd been spending money, let alone 107 grand. So it is kind of bizarre. But on Alec and what he was talking about, he, again, quickly turned it around to what he wanted to talk about, which was independence and how we go about it. And he did say, Phil, this is the wrong hill to die on. Get off it as quick as you can. Get it done and dusted, and let's get on with it. And she pointed out the best way to do that is to collapse Holyrood and have a plebiscite election in Scotland, not the one in 2024 at Westminster, because it could get tied up in who's going to be the next Prime Minister, etc., etc. Do we send more tanks to Eastern Europe? It wouldn't be on independence, so we should collapse Holyrood. Do you think that's the way to do it, or do you think we should go to Westminster?
we've proven that we're wasting our time in Westminster. And as Yvonne points out, Alec just gets to the point. You ask a question, you get an answer. And you ask Alec, you ask Nicola, and I was laughing about Yvonne's comments about Nicola because it's so true, just avoiding the issue. You know, you're talking about climbing this hill. Jack and Jill climbed the hill, you know, and went up the hill and they both came tumbling down. And that's what, sadly, is happening to Nicola's SNP. Our concern is that the independence campaign and the whole independence movement takes a bit of tumble on this because she dragged us up the wrong hill. So no, as ever, Alex is poignant, pointed, concise, and has basically nailed it. He gives you the answer to the questions you ask. Why it'd be nice if we could ask him other questions about Alex and get rid of some of the smearing, the consistent smearing that comes not just from the Scottish government, from the mainstream media, and get Alex back on a platform he deserves to be on. On the other one, Alex Cole-Hampman, he should apologise, as Eva has pointed out, and so should the rest of the clappers. How stupid. I mean, I'm not interested in this pickle bee, what they say, what that person has to say. But you get a clap from, he's aggressive and violent, a nasty piece of work. But you get a clap from the MSPs, and from the sound of this guy and what I've heard about his online activity and private for hire activity, it's not the first time he's had the clap. But one good thing is at least there's some blowback here, you know? And if that's the correct phrase, I apologise if there's a smuttiness connected to the one, because I don't know what these fruit and veg emojis mean, and I've no intention of learning what they mean. I'm not interested in what cis means. I'm not interested in what TERF means. I know what a woman is, an adult human female, and that's enough trouble for one guy, I'll tell you that much. So I'm not interested in all the rest of the nonsense that's come out lately. But the other thing is we should be educating ourselves about what's going on here and learning the lessons and make sure we don't repeat these mistakes. But this blowback that currently we're our MSPs, the SNP and the MPs are experiencing is really, it's the blowback on the virtue signalling, the shallow follow these shallow ideologies that have been so clearly destroyed. And they're getting sprayed by their own nonsense they were spouting. You know, they're being shown what an absolute nonsense this ideology is. And it's going nowhere and it's damaging us. And do you know what? You're not going to get away with it. We have to hold them to account. And that's what we should focus on just now. Making sure we get rid of those who dragged us up this hill. Don't let them come back down. They should tumble down. And the rest of us should get back on the road to independence, because that's where we all want to be.
Well, that's where I'm heading now. I was talking of blowback, Daniel. Stuart MacDonald MP came out earlier in the week. He's 42 statements. We'll go on to the second one in a minute, and I'm sure have some fun with that. But the first one was, he said, well, a de facto referendum would be a terrible blowback and would set back the independence movement for years. Now, if you don't want a de facto referendum, Daniel, and you can't get a referendum for independence, what is the plan then? What do we do?
Well, that's a very good question. Do you think that Stuart MacDonald will be able to answer that? I don't think so. It's just they're coming out with these different permutations of how can we manage to continue this illusion that we're pursuing independence, but we're actually kicking the can further and further down the road. And that's what it is. I think that Alex is absolutely right about collapsing the Holyrood Parliament.
Yes.
And we should hold the SNP to account. No ifs, no buts, 19th of October. Mm-hmm. Now, there's an enormous kickback against that because they're frightened. You know, they know they're not stupid people. They know the writing's on the wall for them. They must know that. And yet they will fight tooth and nail for that never to happen. But that is the right strategy because otherwise it will just be ad infinitum. Let's get another mandate. Let's do this. Let's do that. And at the same time, no concrete plans for independence. There is no strategy for independence. Well, if there is, I haven't seen it from the SNP. You've got to question, how long can this continue? They've had 8 years or whatever it is. How long are people going to remain gullible to accept this nonsense?
Indeed. We have, 45 days before they discuss it even. And from what I've seen of the motion they're put in front of the SNP special conference 119 days after the Supreme Court, it seems that it's one more mandate and we'll go for it in 2026. But before we go on to that one, Yvonne, Stuart would also come out quickly to tell us that the Russians, for some bizarre reason, were interested in his emails. Now, I don't want to be a cynic, but I am. I'm trying to figure out what the boys in the Kremlin would want to do to see the Redcoats' emails. What could possibly be in there with the holiday rep that, the Kremlin, the KGB would want to see? I think he's talking himself up and talking nonsense, don't you? Although I do note that Craig Murray has come out and said he has all those emails, and there are some quite, but we'll come on to them as well, but there's nothing of interest to the Russians.
Well, some of Craig Murray's sources are impeccable, and so I was going to say I'd be interested to see what's in the emails, but this man is as dull as ditch water, and I can't imagine that there's anything of any great surprise in there. I just find it hilarious that this MSP thinks that the Kremlin is interested in him. He's about as interesting as a spotty teenager with impetigo, really. But you have to wonder why he suddenly flagged this up. And maybe he wants to try and make himself more interesting. Or,
as has been indicated, he was caught in a phishing scam, Eva, and put his email data into a malware situation. Now, Craig has, in his blog on Friday, indicated that there are some, he's got them all the emails, and there's a few interesting emails between him and Nicola Sturgeon, and between a lot of these people. I'm not mentioning names, maybe some of the people we've discussed in this show, but certainly some of the gender zealots, I would say. There's messages with them, messages to Stirling, etc. It is quite interesting, isn't it?
It's interesting to see where we go from here, because I think what Craig Murray has indicated is that the emails he's seen might suggest that Stuart MacDonald considers himself to be at Westminster in a minority of Sturgeon loyalists. And if that's the case, then it only goes to show that the splits within the SNP are wider and deeper and more serious than perhaps the SNP leadership want us to know. That said, I think the other interesting aspect from Stuart MacDonald was, as Daniel touched on there, that he says we shouldn't be having a de facto referendum because it won't succeed and it'll set the movement back. The reality is that since ALBA was formed, the SNP have only spoken about independence when they've felt that ALBA were snapping at their heels. And the hard fact of the matter is that in the period of time since the Supreme Court decision was released, while Stuart MacDonald's been worrying about his emails and whether or not the Russians were coming, ALBA have held 2 national assemblies which were open to the general public. We've formulated plans following on from those national assemblies, and tomorrow at our National Council, one of the motions that we'll be debating is the route to independence. And you've seen that the ALBA book events have restarted. Alec, Chris, Taz, Kenny have been working hard promoting the cause of independence, and Neil Hanvey in particular introduced his self-determination bill to the House of Commons 10 days ago or so. So the party who prioritises the urgent need for independence is no longer the SNP. It's not the SNP Green government, because they're in complete disarray. Patrick Harvey and Lorna Slater and Maggie Chapman have been in hiding over the course of the past couple of weeks. No surprises there. But it'll be interesting to see when they reappear, because for all I can see recently, the only contribution Miss Slater's made is in relation to the deposit return scheme, where basically everybody's been slating her because the job that she's doing is so bad. So in terms of where we go in the independence campaign, it'll be interesting to see how very well motivated tomorrow's members of Alba are at National Council, because we will be talking about collapse in Holyrood, the reasons why we can do it, why we should do it, and why we should have the referendum on the 19th of October, in conjunction with the Constitutional Convention, which the First Minister promised us on the Brexit Day, 31 January 2020. So 3 years further down the line, and she's still not delivered that. We also need to have protests by people, we need parliamentary protests, we need international recognition and international action, and all of these things together with a Holyrood electoral event on the 19th of October. These are the things that we should be driving towards, and not messing about debating whether or not a fairly insignificant member of the Westminster Parliament has been targeted by the Kremlin or otherwise. That's not going to impact on Scotland's independence journey by any stretch of the imagination. It's nothing other than self-interested deflection.
As if we weren't a big enough laughing stock without him coming out with that one. But Phil, going back to 2014, we only, Stuart McDonald said, "Yeah, we can't win that." He's already admitted defeat before we've gone for a new one. In 2014, we were at 28% when Alec made the call, and we got very close. We got to within 5%. And everything that was put against us, he had 6 MPs. He didn't have 48 MPs. Kind of defeatist talk. I'm starting from a position even of 45. I'm ready to go for the fight, aren't you?
Yeah, you're speaking the truth, Roddy, which is in stark contrast to what we're hearing from the SNP hierarchy and those currently in charge. What about the truth for a change, Nicola and Stuart McDonald? No more lies. And the division it has created, the lies that you and your ilk have told, the framing of Alex Salmond, the blaming of Alba, blaming of everyone else, the fact that you've walked away from the independence movement and blaming and the initiatives that were set up and blaming everybody else betrays your true intent. And let me be clear, Stuart, I reiterate, I was fond of Stuart at Westminster. He's a good orator and speaker. But sadly for me, he has betrayed the cause. We all went down for, as you say, Roddy, the 56 went down. I thought we all went to Westminster for and for independence, But now a great many are just cashing in, failing to fight for what the people of Scotland want and what we voted them in to do. And like so many more, they need to be removed while Scotland rearranges itself to deliver Scots their land, and their power. Craig Murray has these emails, and I believe Craig, as Yvonne says, he's got impeccable sources, or some of them are. And you might not agree with everything Craig says, but I'm 100% sure he's right on this, because Craig, unlike Nicola and unlike Stuart McDonald, had the courage to stand up to the establishment and suffer the consequences based upon honest principle. Something that the current SNP leadership are bereft of. That cannot be said of any SNP MPs and MPs who curry in with the London establishment. Sadly, the hunger and intention to settle up the 56 went down to Westminster with, and the genuine expectation that we were going to be the last MPs, that's long gone. It's replaced now by egotists and careerists who know they've never had it so good. And when this gravy train stops, none of them will ever earn anything like the same money or get their egos massaged. So they've sold us out and they must be removed.
You alluded to it earlier, Daniel, about, kicking the can down the road. There's the other phrase is the one, if you don't buy a lottery ticket, you ain't going to win. And if we don't buy a lottery ticket, and start a campaign, whether it be a plebiscite at Holyrood or plebiscite election at Westminster, or she manages somehow to get the mythical Section 30. But we have to do something, Dan. Scotland can't wait any longer.
Yes, well, nothing survives in a vacuum, you know, and there has been nothing for the past 8 odd years. And so there has to be something. Otherwise, the whole idea of Scottish independence falls by the wayside. And that's where Alba has stepped into the breach to fill that vacuum with a very robust, coherent plan. And I think it's the ideal time for us to promote that and to drive forward the agenda, because no one else is driving forward the agenda.
We have to hope that something comes out of their conference in the middle of next month. We shall see. But moving on a wee bit, Yvonne, because I know you're wanting to talk about this next topic now. There's things happening throughout the world. And the biggest tragedy at the moment is the terrible earthquakes that have hit Turkey and Syria. Really shocking. And one of the biggest bits of concern for me is that they're in Syria are not getting the help they should be getting because of sanctions. They're needing heavy equipment, they're needing all sorts of things, but the sanctions against them are preventing that coming in. Should the US and the EU and the UK lift, even temporarily, the sanctions to allow help to get in to help the people?
Well, of course they should. I mean, at the moment, the British government is deliberating whether or not to send tanks, Challenger 2 tanks to Ukraine. And we can't even get blankets or spades and shovels out into North Syria. And I was out there back in 2018. There's about half a dozen different rebel groups operating in the region. And some of them do have links to Al-Qaeda. It can be quite dangerous, but there are a lot of charities that are willing to go into these areas, and they're being prevented from doing so because of sanctions imposed by the US, by Britain. There are about 400 individuals from Britain out there who are delivering aid at the moment and tearing through the rubble to try and save people's lives. In fact, there's also a British doctor out there, Dr. Islam Shujal, and they've got this overwhelming task in front of them, working in a war zone. It's now a disaster zone as well. And, where's the humanity? We're quite happy to throw tanks to fuel a never-ending war, which is what Ukraine is in danger of becoming. And yet we're ignoring the plight of millions of Syrian people. What is the difference between them and Ukrainians? They cut, they bleed, they feel pain in the same way. Just because a Syrian mother isn't sitting at home watching Netflix and eating a Big Mac doesn't mean to say that she's any less of a mother than a mother in Ukraine who's sitting in a cellar, trying to protect her family as well. It's disgusting. We are racist in the West, and we have got to stop judging people by their skin color and really start to, when we talk about humanity, talk about everyone. It doesn't matter who they are, how they pray, if they need help, we should be there. And we're privileged in the West. There's no reason why we shouldn't go out to help these people. And the 400 who are out there at the moment from all over the UK, there'll be Scots in there as well, have gone out of their own accord, out for their own selfless reasons. And the British government has said, oh, you're a terrorist, and they've taken their citizenship from them. And yet we have people from this country who are risking life and limb in Ukraine, and they're getting on the front page of the Daily Record and being praised for their efforts. You know, why is it that Ukraine is a good cause, but anything to do with Syria, let them rot, let them suffer, let them go without, and turn? We shouldn't be turning our back on these people. It's heartbreaking. And as I say, I was out there just a couple of years ago. I opened an orphanage for Syrian refugees, young Syrian girls, just bits of kids. I don't know if that orphanage is still standing. It was in Sanliurfa, which is very near the center of this devastating earthquake. And I'm seeing lots of images on TV, and what I find really irritating is this seemingly drive by Sky News to demonize the Turkish government. They know that there's an election coming up in May, and they're trying to whip up a bit of a storm on the ground, as though, you know, the people haven't suffered enough, by suggesting that the government has not responded quickly enough to this earthquake. Well, the area of devastation is as big and as sprawling as the United Kingdom. It's a huge area. And you know what we're like over a bit of snow, the whole country descends into chaos. So, you know, thank God it hasn't happened in the UK, because we wouldn't be able to cope. We can't cope with heavy rains. We're not coping with the climate change at the moment. But again, it's international politics manages to override all of humanity, and it's the certain elements in Britain and Europe and America who see this as a great opportunity to undermine the leadership of Tayyip Erdogan, who isn't everyone's cup of tea, but he is the Turkish people's choice. And, you know, people don't like to be reminded of that. It is a democracy.
But they also want to get rid of Assad as well, and they're using that as an excuse now. They mentioned, oh, we're giving aid to Syria, but it's only going into the areas where the Americans are controlling. The same areas, Eva, where every day tankers and tankers are leaving, going through Iraq with Syrian oil stolen by the Americans. They're happy to take the oil for nothing, stealing it, however you want to put it, but they're not letting the sanctions go in. It is wrong. Overnight now, the UN, EU, everyone lift the sanctions. As Yvonne's pointed out, these people are just like us, but maybe they've got brown skin. Isn't that terrible? Maybe they're Muslims. Isn't that terrible? It's wrong, Eva, and it's got to stop. We've got to help these people.
Roddy, one of my heroes was my dad. I've spoken about him before. He worked in Algeria on the pipeline across the Sahara Desert in the mid-1960s. And I have a photo of him, which is very, very dear to me. And it's taken out in the desert, and he's got two wee children standing beside him because their home is behind him, and it's a cave in the desert. And the wee boy that's in the photo was hiding in the cave. He couldn't come out because he was an albino. So my dad gave him his sunglasses. That's the kind of thing that we should be doing. Now, that's a true story, but the poignancy of it is that you can imagine the bonanza that there was going to be for Algeria where the oil pipeline was completed. And yet, it's what oil has done throughout the world. We've ended up with people suffering unnecessarily and wars fought over black gold. And in many respects, we've made no progress at all in the almost 60 years since my dad was working there in the Sahara. It's absolutely heartbreaking. I watched the news today and had to turn away in tears, not for the first time, and I'll certainly be far from the only one that felt it. But I was watching a wee girl who had had her leg amputated because she'd been obviously very seriously injured in the earthquake, but she was thankful that she was still alive. And all I could think about was that she had said she was so much looking forward to getting a prosthetic leg. You know, there is something very, very wrong in the world today that we're not able to go in there en masse and rescue these people quickly and make sure that we save more lives. We've all watched the footage of the wee girl who saved her wee brother, and they were, you know, underneath rocks and boulders and debris for 17 hours or something, and she held his wee head safe and the two of them got out. We've seen the other newborn babies that survived as the only members of their own families to survive. We could have done more as an international community to go in more quickly and save more people. And the fact that we're not doing that in the areas where they really need us is absolutely shameful. And I can't really speak about it because it just angers me far too much.
Daniel, sanctions, these kind of sanctions that happen, they don't ever, I mean, they're meant to bring down the regimes, but they don't. These sanctions affect the ordinary people. They put the people again. It's always the people who are least able to defend themselves that suffer from these things. So is there really a benefit to sanctions?
The only benefit to sanctions is the kudos given to those who initiate them, I think. You're absolutely right. They're ineffective, and it's the ordinary man, woman, children in the street who suffer. I read an article earlier in the week about a reporter had gone to this fancy designer outlet mall in Moscow, thinking, well, all these shops will be closed. Not a bit of it. You know, no. There was even a Rolls Royce showroom, and he was asked, you know, if I wanted a Rolls Royce, could I get one? Oh yeah, 3 weeks and we'll get you one. Yeah. So you're absolutely right. Sanctions do not have an impact on the people who they're supposed to target. It's the ordinary men and women who suffer. But the question then arises, you know, how do we register our disagreement or our displeasure or a complete animosity towards regimes which don't follow the same standards of human rights or whatever that we do? It's a tricky one. I don't know what the answer to that is. But clearly, I agree with you that sanctions in the current form haven't worked. They haven't worked in Russia. They're not working in Iran and these places. There has to be a new strategy evolved as to how you really effect change. But of course, the question is, just because we might want to effect change, is that the right thing to do? And often it's not, because the drivers for change promoted by the West quite often are vested interests, economic vested interests, which are not in the greater interest of the population as a whole, the planet as a whole. So it's a tricky one, I think.
Yeah, it's, you know, we talk about things that are happening in sanctions, Phil, and one of the things that brought me into, not just independence has always been my main thing, but it was always because we were, the independence movement was neutrality was our thing. We were against weapons of mass destruction. We were against foreign incursions. We looked to our Irish cousins for neutrality. And this government, another thing the SNP have done is gone full Britain at foreign policy, supporting Ukraine. I watched the leader of the SNP say Slava Ukraina to the leader of Ukraine. And now, if people just know, that is the equivalent, for those of you who don't know, of Heil Hitler, because it's a bandera. But we have said things. I've since February last year, I've been saying, stop this war, stop it now, and I say it again today. Stop the war, both sides, negotiated peace, stop the killing. I'm against wars. I'm not on anyone's side. Contrary to what people say, if you're not attacking, you know, supporting Ukraine, you're supposed to be pro-Putin. But we were skeptical when the Nord Stream pipe went up. Now, there's a very famous, probably the world's most famous investigative journalist, Seymour Hersh. He was the man, ladies and gentlemen, who brought My Lai to us. Those of you who are old enough to remember the Vietnam War like me, which I campaigned against and marched against. He was the one who brought out My Lai, where there was a terrible massacre by the American forces. They wiped out a village, an innocent village. They burnt it, they killed everyone, shot everyone. He was the man that brought it to the attention of the world. He's put out an article proving that the Americans actually blew up the Nord Pipe. And yet, the Europeans are going to accept it, the Germans are going to accept it, the EU are going to accept it. But it's an act of terrorism.
Yeah, it's exactly what it is. And this man, you read his article from 2008, is it Preparing the Battlefield? Some of the exposés he has been responsible for are ground shattering, they're earth shattering. He predates Wikipedia, but it's of that order of magnitude. He really has got right into how we operate, how the West operates. I mean, people in the West, we operate under the illusion this is some kind of cowboy film with white hats and black hats. Nothing could be further from the truth. When you look at what happened in Syria and the earthquake, I agree with everything Yvonne says, but a lot of this comes down to, and it ties into what Seymour's saying, is that why are Erdogan and why are Assad being targeted? These are all leaning towards BRICS. Everyone who the West has tread upon is now getting together in the BRICS plus 12, which is the transformation between a unipolar world that we saw with America taking the lead after the wall came down in Russia. And now what we face is a multipolar world where there's a peer competitor, not just on the rise, but rising very quickly. And it's the Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa we spoke of, plus 12. And the influence they're going to have is going to be staggering. And we're going to see bigger and bigger impacts of that on our daily lives. So we shouldn't presume that we're the good guys in any of this, because we've been operating for a very long time. Perfidious Albion, what America did starting in 53 with Mossadegh. You know, there are so many instances, and this gentleman, he has exposed so many of these false flag interventions by the West. We who pretend to be the good guys, we who put our moral superiority above others when we should be putting humanity first. And this comes back down to, let's localise this. Who are we? We're Scots. We are the people who live and work in Scotland, and we have a social leaning. We have a humanitarian leaning, and our leaders need to reflect that. Our parties need to reflect that. The SNP certainly used to reflect that. Alba now seems to have taken on that mantle. But people like Stuart MacDonald and Nicola are getting their comeuppance because they're currying in with the West, and they're being exposed more and more, and more power to your man, because his preparing the battlefield in 2008 was a real eye-opener. And the Nord Stream, he's saying what we all know to be true. There are so many more people who actually know what happened here but are frightened to speak the truth. Germany, politicians, Europe, start telling the truth. Start standing up for what is right instead of looking after your own self-interests. And the world will be a much better place.
Here. Daniel, on that, the UN is refusing to confirm or deny this. The EU the same. The Germans, who are affected most of all, they've stopped the inquiry within the Norwegians and the Danes, because obviously they found something they don't like, which is the Americans did it. It kind of tells the rest of the world. It is now the EU, the UN, and the other one is, of course, the International Atomic Authority, who refuse to acknowledge that the Ukrainians are shelling a nuclear power station. It really makes you think, well, who can we trust? If we're the good guys, why are we having to tell lies and hide the truth?
Well, has it not always been thus? I think we only learn the truth nowadays because of instant communications, global communications in seconds. The whole Nord Stream thing in Seymour Hersh's article is really fascinating, I think, because you're right in that the initial reaction of the EU is, let's not touch this with a barge pole. And that, of course, is because of because of Ukraine and the commitment, the seeming commitment between the EU and the US to support Ukraine. But I think it's more intriguing than that, Roddy. I may be wrong in this, but I think people like Macron will see this as a lever to push forward his agenda, longer-term agenda for the EU defense policy, EU defense strategy. That's his big idea, and that is weaning the EU away from over-reliance on NATO and, as a result, on the US, and doing our own thing. And I think this is a driver which will help Macron in the longer term, if he can pull this off before his end of his presidential term, to drive forward this agenda, and that could have interesting consequences for the long-term future of NATO and for the US-NATO alliance. It's fascinating stuff. But I mean, it was quite interesting. I thought there was a flurry of activity on the news and media about these explosions, and you saw the Danish Navy footage of the gas escaping, and then suddenly it just stopped. The agenda moved on to something else, despite this being a major catastrophic impact in the Baltic Sea. And that was suspicious, I think. So I agree with what others have said. I think Seymour Hersh's reputation is second to none, and the US have denied it categorically, and it's a one-liner, and that tells you a lot. Actually, I think. Yes, exactly, yes. So I think I wouldn't rule out the fact that this could have longer-term implications for European defence policy, in the years to come.
Yeah, well, yeah. One other thing, just because we're running out of time, although you'll notice a lot of our viewers, Yvonne, are saying, I'll run it for 2 hours, 3 hours, 2 days, keep Prism going for 2 days solid, make it a marathon. Well, we can't quite make it a marathon, but I think we'll overrun a wee bit today. But there's another bit of that burst through my head, which is Joseph Borrell, who, let me get his title correct, the High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policies. And he suggested that the reason they had blocked all Russian media into the EU was to protect freedom of speech. Now, I need that explained, Yvonne. How can blocking all that media be protecting freedom of speech, or am I missing something?
Well, it can't. It's censorship, and we live in Scotland, not North Vietnam. We used to be able to have Russia Today on our TVs, and I rarely watched it. But the odd time I did, it's because I wanted to find out what the Russians were thinking or saying about a certain international event. I wanted to get their perspective and listen to all sides and then make up my mind, instead of being told by the likes of Rishi Sunak or Suella Braverman what I should be thinking. And this sort of censorship is outrageous. Our media is censored. We didn't get round to talking about the Jedburgh transgender butcher, but I was at Selkirk Court yesterday, and there was nearly 20 media there, and the journalists were told that they couldn't go in and report on the case. That is censorship. Obviously, there are going to be restrictions in a sensitive case like that. But I felt that the journalists should have protested to the sheriff and asked on what grounds he was refusing to allow them into his court. I'd left by that time because I just thought I'll soon find out through newspapers and TV what's happening. but the media was banned from the sheriff's court. This sort of censorship should not be going on. We keep talking about the free world and we in the West, and we sit, you know, and in our white privilege and think that we're above everybody else, when in fact the censorship that is in existence is just off the scale. The high moral ground has gone. It's been blown away. One of the reasons that I was particularly keen on an independent Scotland is I thought that we would be able to carve out our own ethical foreign policy and be a world leader in doing the right thing. But we're not. We're tied to a government in Westminster with the morals of an alley cat. For instance, next week, somebody called Erkan Tunyaz, who is the governor of the Xinjiang province in China, is coming to Britain. This is a man who is from a region accused of genocide of the Uyghur population, of setting up concentration camps, of having women sterilized, of having children taken away from their families and given to other families of a different ethnicity, you know, ethnic cleansing on a massive scale. And the British government has so much posturing and gesturing to do, and yet it is giving this man a visa to come to Britain.
Well, I wouldn't be so surprised, Yvonne, because let's remember who started concentration camps. And if you go to Tasmania and places where they took their children and gave them away and did all those things, so I wouldn't be shocked at the British, like, oh, seems like a good guy. He sounds our cup of tea. We're not in a position, but that's the problem. Eva, you know,
it all goes back to independence. And if we had independence, we could stand up and cry this out and say, well, you're not coming into our country. There's nothing to stop this man from driving up the A68 and coming into Scotland through Carter Bar. We don't want that sort of filth in our country. And yet we're stuck because we can't get independence.
Well, we all remember that picture of Drew Henry and David Linden in British Army fatigues. We'll send them down the border to stop them. They can be our soldiers. Eva, I'm going to quickly, I've got a couple of last things to do, but one of the ones that I think gets me is when, talking about this censorship, how the BBC is saying, yes, I mean, very pious about, distortions and propaganda, and this is why Russian television shouldn't be shown in the UK. But I object strongly. If I don't want to watch it, and there's lots of channels I don't watch, I do not watch Fox News. I choose not to watch Fox News. I choose not to listen to Tory parties making statements and speeches, or the Tory party conference. That's my choice. How dare someone make the choice for me? If I don't want to watch Russian television, which I didn't, barring the Alex Salmon show, I don't think I ever did. How dare they stop us watching what we want to watch? Who gave them the right in a so-called free democracy to stop us?
Because they just do what they want to do and everybody else has to suck it up. It's as easy as that. And I agree with Yvonne when she says this all goes back to independence. Of course it does. We've seen in the last wee while issues to do with, say, the anti-strike bill and related matters. Tories will Tory. The establishment will protect the establishment. They will censor whatever they want to censor for the sake of keeping us in the dark as much as they can. And the position in relation, for example, to anti-strike legislation only goes to show two things. First of all, never trust a Tory. And secondly, if we had independence, we wouldn't have to bother our backsides about it. But in the real world, you take what you get when you're living under the British establishment rule. And you also have to understand that when there is anti-strike legislation and you're not allowed to withdraw your labour without sanction, you're little more than a glorified slave. And it's issues like that people need to understand, and it's things like that need to be publicised and properly reported, and reported accurately, especially in the context of their potential or actual effects and impacts. And I think that's what's gone sadly wrong with especially the coverage by the BBC, where they report, in effect, the news that they want to report because it seems to uphold and maintain and bolster the, in inverted commas, British way of life.
Last question, Phil, to yourself. We had Zelensky over here getting feted and applauded and shown to the king and all the thing that goes with it. And promises of all sorts of weapons and tanks and you name it, we've heard it all. We also we talked about it last week, we had 500,000 people in strike last week because they can't get a decent living wage. Nurses, doctors, teachers, cleaners, firemen, all the ancillary workers of the NHS. We've got the worst pensions in Europe. They tell us we can't afford to get any better and just suck it up, but we can find money to send to keep a war going in a foreign country. You don't end wars by arming them.
True. Why is this happening? Why are we focusing on the wrong issues? It's just what we've been saying all along, because we're not independent and free to make our own choices. These would not be the choices that the people of Scotland would make. Illegal wars, continuous funding and support of what Western society has become, which is a focus on commercial capitalism, usury, and that which people who don't actually make it. I'm a bit of a socialist, but I'm also a capitalist. I'm an industrial capitalist. I support companies that make things and organizations that build things. I think our focus should revert to what made the West great. And it was at one point, never perfect, but it's in decline now. Why? Because we're now punishing even our own people by withdrawing as much money out of it. And it's the elitists that are doing this. These globalists, the financial capitalists, are destroying everything we've created. And they're raping and pillaging their own, as they've always done, to continue to make a buck fast and quick and move it offshore. So no, the only way you can do this is by putting your own house in order first. And that means an independent Scotland standing up for the principles, the priorities, the values that made us who we are and make us respected around the world, and stop this laughing stock nonsense and get rid of the clowns, the charlatans, the shysters, and those who would see us, do us down for their own benefit. Time for Indy.
Here, I agree. Now, we definitely have an hour on it out now. For all those you're saying, oh, make it longer, Roddy. Well, I have. It's a wee bit longer this week. A wee Roddy bonus for you all. Now, if you haven't already liked it, hit that like button, folks. And also remember, if you haven't subscribed, to subscribe. It all helps us with the algorithms here. And you can get us on YouTube, you can get on my blog site, you can get us on Twitter, you can get us on Facebook. Did I say Rumble? Did I mention Rumble? Who else we've got? We've got another one, like an Anchor. And, we're all over the place. Millions of it. So no excuse for missing a show. And from next week, I will be coming to you from Thailand. So I'm going to try and get one of these wee pointy hats. I'll wear that next week. When I'm there. And can I thank you, my panelists, for being on, and Daniel, thank you for your debut, which was magnificent. I hope you'll come back. We'll pay the usual fee, same fee every week.
Great, thank you.
Great to see you all. And you folks who have been watching, I hope you've enjoyed this as much as we've enjoyed having a wee natter among ourselves. And until we see you all again, take care now.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.